Hello, everyone. Hi. Hello. I'm Sam, and you are listening to Geliteracy, where the chair's creaking. I have a book, well, not a book, a part of a book. You know, books come in parts, and sometimes with paper and words on them, and I'm going to read some of those for you this evening. It will be, when we get to it, The Lady of Glenwith Grange by Wilkie Collins, which I am like 70 to 80% confident hasn't been read on this stream before. I think with some small measure of confidence that Lucy's read some Wilkie Collins on here before and enjoyed it. But, you know, we've been doing this for a few years now, and not all of the YouTube VODs are correctly titled. Wow, Lucy, with the 7-stream streak, what does it feel like? How is it? You read the one with the screw top bed? That sounds like a setup to a joke. Also, Stephen, hello, thank you for the 48 months. Lovely to see you. I was lurking earlier when you were playing Ken, which is a game I keep hovering over the buy button. It looks like something I could get into, but also I feel like I should finish Baby Steps. Not that they're kind of similar games, but there's a part of my brain that just goes, they look kind of similar. You should finish one before playing the other. But it looks good. It looks like a nice game to play. The one with the full poster that crushed people. Oh yeah, yes, that one. The Killer Bird by Wilkie Collins. I think it was called The Bed That Killed People. You hope we're all well? I hope we're all well. I'm doing okay myself. I should finish Baby Steps simply because if I don't, it feels ironic. Yeah, look, true, okay, look, yes, fine. It's awesome, yeah, it'll be around when I finish Baby Steps. That is true, yeah, it's not going to go anywhere. Oh, good point, well made. There's always a Steam sale around the corner. That is also true. They do happen more and more often. Like, they've replaced the sudden unexpected daily discount of the Steam winter sale with just, oh, it's another Steam sale this week. Right, got it. That's from The Sims, The Bed That Kills People. Ah, yes, of course. I easily mistaken. Was it meant to be personal? No, that's... Baby Steps made it personal. Anything else after that is just happenstance? I don't know. I'm struggling to form sentences this evening. Which is just as well that I have a book in front of me with them already formed, so I don't even have to think. Which, yeah, is just as well. I don't feel entirely with it. I do apologise for what feels like a big lack of streams. Yeah, I don't know. Things just keep happening. As I'm sure one or two of you watching, listening, can, you know, points at the rest of the world. Yeah, things do relentlessly keep happening all the time, and without cessation. Maybe they could stop. I don't know. It might be nice for a reprieve of some kind. Yeah, you haven't been entirely with it since 2011. Yeah, I know it's been a long old 5 years. But yeah, regrettably. Well, no, not regrettably. No, I'm leaving that spirit in the past. In spite of it all, we're here. There. No, none of the like performative cynicism. We're here, and tomorrow is just one more chance to make things better. So, there's your positivity. Stick it on a poster with a kitten. Yeah. I don't really know what I have to talk about, if anything, before I get to book. Despite everything, it's still me. Yeah. I still feel like I can't really go quoting that line from Undertale because I've not played Undertale. I've seen it played. but having not actually yet myself played the Undertale, it always feels a little bit rich. No to perform to cynicism, yes to spiteful hope. Yeah, exactly. Continuing to exist in spite of the troubles in the world can be its own act of defiance. So, yeah, keep on keeping on. So, can I want me to play it on stream? No, that's the thing. I am keeping it in my Steam library as kind of a in case of emergency break glass situation, because I know that the advice in all caps is do not play Undertale on stream, because the community that shows up to watch you play Undertale are incapable of being normal about watching somebody play Undertale, and will do their best to ruin the experience for you in spite of themselves. And yet, because I have already seen the game played through, I think pretty much like on a pacifism run from start to finish, I've kind of already had it spoiled for me anyway, so I exist in this weird position of, like, you can't force me to do something that, like, I already know what's going to happen if I make the choices. And plus I exist in a sort of weird position where, like, you know, seemingly the authentic, I just went really British there, the authentic experience, the way that you're meant to play it, is to not know anything before you go through and make the choices that you make, and then you get to the end and go, oh, I could have done this instead. Okay. I don't get to have that, so I don't know. It's odd. You really must get back to it one day. You just got stuck because of your pacifist run. Yeah, that's that's the thing. It did also look very difficult. Because I guess we can discuss Undertale for a bit. Why not? It's not a full stream length story, I don't think. So hey, we can just sit and chat. Spins chair around. Let's rap. What was I going to say? Yeah, like from what I've seen, my natural heightened honed gamer instincts would be probably, frankly, to try and kill the first monster the game puts in front of me and just go on from there. Because if the game says, hey, fight this thing and here's how you fight it and defeat it, you know, I've played enough video games where the only verb that you have is kill. And so, you know, that's probably what I'm going to do. And hey, guess what? That's not actually what you're meant to do if you want to get the pacifist run and be good. And so I feel as though I don't get to make that mistake and have that moment of learning, which is interesting to have, like, denied myself that revelation. And hey, guess what? Now anyone actually listening also gets to miss out on that story. You're just a chaos gremlin, you watch me do things you would never do with Glee. Yeah, but I'm also really bad at that. I am one of those people who, when playing, like, Mass Effect, let's just take an easy example, Mass Effect, and the game gives you the choice, like, someone comes up to you and is like, help me, Commander Shepard, I am a poor orphan and I just want 5 credits to go and buy some lunch for my entire family. And I'm there like, I just opened a bin and found 50 credits. Yeah, I've got 5 to spare. And the game gives you the choice of give 5 credits to the orphan or punch their family. And like, ooh, well, I guess I'm gonna, you know, I'm gonna do the good thing, because you've made this choice extremely simple. And then you sort of finish it and go, oh, maybe I should go through and make the bad choices. And I make one bad choice. Aha, I'm going to punch the orphan's family, and then I feel terrible. I can't do it. I can't be mean to digital people. It makes me feel bad. And so I accept that games give you the choice for the Chaos Gremlin option, but I can't do that either. I can't be a nasty person in a video game. What if they remember? You know, this feels, yeah. Can't do it. You know, do you wish to feed the dog or not? I'm giving the dog food. I will give the dog food, because otherwise it's going to look sad. Not to spoil, because if you got it right, I don't know any other ending than the pacifist run, but Undertale's actually pretty good at navigating that guild. Okay, yeah, I think I only know the pacifist run. Can't be mean to a Bioware companion, they're your friends IRL. Yeah, exactly. Is, you know, if you say something mean and they look sad, then that's it. Friendship ruined. You can't go back. Well, you could reload an old save, but that just feels bad. And you know something they don't. You know you have that within you and they don't. Bad. No, what I have been playing recently, which when I told a friend I'd started playing it, he was like, oh, yeah, that absolutely seems like something I thought you would have played a long time ago, because it's one of the, like, early examples of the kind of games that you like, that do weird meta things with their behaviour. Is the game One Shot, which seems kind of short, in that I sort of... I'm not, like, it's called One Shot, and the game says early on, you have one chance to do this. And yeah, I think I had avoided it for years. I've had it on my Steam wishlist for years, but I sort of avoided it because I look at it and and the reason I'm getting to this is because of Undertale. I'd built up a bit of a, I guess, I can't find the right word for it, but a sort of a dislike slash like resentment towards Undertale, not because of anything the game did, but because of that like fever pitch hype around it. And I am, unfortunately, and I do mean that, like, quite an annoyingly contrarian person. If I'm surrounded by people saying, this thing's amazing, it's the best thing ever, it's so good, it's so amazing, it's the best thing that's ever been done, you should try it, you'll love it, try it now, try it, do it, try it, it's amazing, it will change. Like, I reject that. I can't stand that, and it puts me off. And so, because like Undertale had that around it for so long, I then got into this mindset of seeing another indie game that's been made with like RPG Maker, or I can't think of, is it just Game Maker? I can't think. There's some of the other like very simple, very accessible game dev tools, and a lot of those have this like, oh, you really liked Undertale, didn't you? Like fingerprints all over them. And that's fine. I need to stress, it's the reason you probably never watched Breaking Bad. Yeah, that's fair. I have to stress, like, it is completely okay to like a thing and then go, oh, I'm going to go make my own. Good. Do that. Learn to make things. Go make things. It's something that I struggle with, and you are doing well by doing that. But I would have this reaction of like, oh, this looks like an Undertale. And so then that connects to, that's this game that I've rejected because everyone goes on about how great it is all the time. And as I say, eventually I watched someone play through Undertale and I was like, you know what, actually, yeah, fair enough. I did not respect your game. This is good, actually. I see why everyone likes it. Hype, well deserved. Okay, my bad. And so eventually, like, that dam kind of broke a little bit. It's like, well, okay, then I'm going to play One Shot. Let's see what that's like. Turns out, very good. I'm liking it. It does cool meta things, like talk to me as the player, which I suspected it would do, but did it in a way that sort of caught me off guard, and I always respect that. So yeah, that's not that anyone asked, but I guess what I've been playing lately, other than just an obscene amount of, and this isn't going to be a point of discussion because it's got literally nothing of interest to put on the stream. A huge amount of the latest Deadlock updates, because they're rolling out a bunch of new heroes into the game, and they've added an incredibly Moorish new game mode called Street Brawl, which is just like a really fast-paced 4v4 like skirmish mode, and I've lost myself to that, so that's been good fun. But as I say, so far and away removed from anything relevant to the stream, that I'm not going to make it a topic of conversation. But while I pause for breath for a second, I'm also just kind of partly stalling because I'm expecting at some point Joey's going to come up and knock on the door and ask to come in. Oh, no, actually, other things. I ordered myself a couple of books the other day. One of which I have forgotten what it was. Oh, yeah, no. I've just remembered. Yeah, I ordered a couple of books. And I'm just going to remind myself what the title of one of them was. But one of them is called I Will Kill Your Imaginary Friend for $200 by Robert Brockway. And the other is The Nightland by William Hope Hodgson, which is his, like, post-apocalyptic disaster story thing, which sounds really interesting. I remember reading, because we've obviously done a fair few Hodgson stories on this channel, and liked the way he wrote. And I remember, like, here's the thing, mostly I encounter authors on here through their short stories, and then you get the whole, like, what did you just do short stories, or do you do anything sort of more novel length? Is that next in line for my longer read? It might be. It sounds like quite a tome, to be honest. I think it's like 440 pages or something, which obviously that depends on the size of the page and the size of the print. But it might be. Like, that's going to take me a while. At the rate that I go, it's going to take me a long time to get through, but yeah, I could do that, considering it. But yeah, because we mostly, like, encounter authors through short stories, I guess. And in the case of someone like M.R. James, I don't think he wrote any... Angeline, hello, welcome in. I don't think James, for instance, wrote any that I've been able to find, at least, like novel length things. They all seem to be like short ghost stories, and like Algernon Blackwood, for instance, wrote seemingly like a few longer things, although the only actual like novel length story from him that I can think of is The Human Chord. I can't remember if there's others. There's some that are more like novella length. You're going to be unreliable with reading the next few months due to work, so you might work out well for me to have a longer thing to read. Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Yeah, why not commit to that now? Let's see. And then I open the first page and I go, oh, good grief. No, I don't want to read. This is always the problem. Like, starting something new. Please don't be racist. Please don't be horrible. Please just be good. Just be chill. Yeah. Don't make it uncomfortable. But yeah, seems like Hodgson was another one who I think probably done to make a decision. No, that's true. Yeah, I feel like Hodgson, I think, wrote, again, primarily short stories, and then a couple of slightly longer ones. I'm looking in the wrong place. I should be looking down at those shelves. Yeah, like the Boats of the Glencarrig, and the other one. Oh, I don't think I have it. I think I lent it and I never got it back. Oh no. The House on the Borderland. That was it, because I really liked that one. But yeah, again, those are sort of on the shorter end, whereas the Nightland sounds like quite a long story. I'm sort of interested to actually see that. Obviously. Otherwise, why did I buy it? But yeah, so I've got those to look forward to, as well as those on either the Chilliteracy or the Longest John's Discord will be aware that I have, for reasons I can only partially explain, started a reread of House of Leaves, which is going slowly, but well okay so far. I am enjoying it again. It is literally like reading a textbook, but it's a textbook about a documentary about a weird house. And so I enjoy it. It's good. It's a good time. And it looks like the TLJ book club has managed to tie the vote so that it is one of the 2 books that people are going to be reading as the next allocated book for book club. So, you know, enjoy. I look forward to reactions from people getting into it and going, yo, what? Why is this like this? How am I supposed to read this? It's a good fun time for all involved. Anyway, I'm just sitting here rambling. I'm running my mouth and just filling the air. So, I'm gonna kick my feet up on the desk, make a bit of noise on the mic while I reposition it. Apologies. I need to work out a better lighting solution, actually, so I can, like I have a light that I clip onto the top of the microphone, but it sort of, it's not an entirely comfortable setup for the cable and the light, so I need to figure out a better solution for this, but that's not today. If we are ready for the abrupt start of tonight's story, by abrupt because I'm just rambling and then suddenly going, hey, let's do this now. Your text is linked at the top of chat or in the details below the video if you're watching on YouTube. Also, hello YouTube. Hi, welcome. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoy this. If we're all ready, then let us begin. The Lady of Glenwith Grange by Wilkie Collins. Prologue. My practice in the art of portrait painting, if it has done nothing else, has at least fitted me to turn my talents, such as they are, to a great variety of uses. I have not only taken the likenesses of men, women, and children, but have also extended the range of my brush, under stress of circumstances, to horses, dogs, houses, and in one case even to a bull, the terror and glory of his parish, and the most truculent sitter I ever had. The beast was appropriately named Thunder and Lightning, and was the property of a gentleman farmer named Garthwaite, a distant connection of my wife's family. How it was that I escaped being gored to death before I had finished my picture is more than I can explain to this day. Thunder and Lightning resented the very sight of me and my colour box, as if he viewed the taking of his likeness in the light of a personal insult. It required 2 men to coax him, while a third held him by a ring in his nostrils before I could venture on beginning to work. Even then he always lashed his tail and jerked his huge head and rolled his fiery eyes with a devouring anxiety to have me on his horns for daring to sit down quietly and look at him. Never, I can honestly say, did I feel more heartily grateful for the blessings of soundness of limb and wholeness of skin than when I had completed the picture of the bull. One morning, when I had but little more than half done my unwelcome task, my friend and I were met on our way to the bull stable by the farm bailiff, who informed us gravely that Thunder and Lightning was just then in such an especially surly state of temper as to render it quite unsafe for me to think of painting him. I looked inquiringly at Mr. Garthwaite, who smiled with an air of comic resignation and said, "Very well then, we have nothing for it but to wait till tomorrow. What do you say to a morning's fishing, Mr. Kirby, now that my bull's bad temper has given us a holiday?" I replied, with perfect truth, that I knew nothing about fishing. But Mr. Garthwaite, who was as ardent an angler in his way as Isaac Walton himself, was not to be appeased even by the best of excuses. "It is never too late to learn," cried he. "I will make a fisherman of you in no time, if you will only attend to my directions." It was impossible for me to make any more apologies without the risk of appearing discourteous, so I thanked my host for his friendly intentions, and, with some secret misgivings, accepted the first fishing rod that he put into my hands. "We shall soon get there," said Mr. Garthwaite. "I'm taking you to the best mill stream in the neighbourhood." It was all one to me whether we got there soon or late, and whether the stream was good or bad. However, I did my best to conceal my unsportsmanlike apathy, and tried to look quite happy and very impatient to begin as we drew near to the mill, and heard louder and louder the gushings of many waters all around. Leading the way immediately to a place beneath the falling stream, where there was a deep, eddying pool, Mr. Garthwaite baited and threw in his line before I had fixed the joints of my fishing rod. This first difficulty overcome, I involuntarily plunged into some excellent but rather embarrassing sport with my line and hook. I caught every one of my garments from head to foot. I angled for my own clothes with the dexterity and success of Isaac Walton himself. I caught my hat, my jacket, my waistcoat, my trousers, my fingers and my thumbs. Some devil possessed my hook. Some more than eel-like vitality twirled and twisted in every inch of my line. By the time my host arrived to assist me, I had attached myself to my fishing rod, apparently for life. All difficulties yielded, however, to his patience and skill. My hook was baited for me and thrown in. My rod was put into my hand. My friend went back to his place, and we began at last to angle in earnest. We certainly caught a few fish. In my case, I mean, of course, that the fish caught themselves, but they were scanty in number and light in weight. Whether it was the presence of the miller's foreman, a gloomy personage who stood staring disastrously upon us from a little flower garden on the opposite bank, that cast an adverse influence over our sport, or whether my want of faith and earnestness as an angler acted retributively on my companion as well as myself, I know not. But it is certain that he got almost as little reward for his skill as I got for my patience. After nearly 2 hours of intense expectation on my part, and intense angling on his, Mr. Garthwaite jerked his line out of the water in a rage, and bade me follow him to another place, declaring that the stream must have been netted by poachers in the night, who had taken all the large fish away with them, and had thrown in the small ones to grow until their next visit. We moved away, further down the bank, leaving the imperturbable foreman still in the flower garden, staring at us speechlessly on our departure, exactly as he had already stared at us on our approach. "Stop a minute," said Mr. Garthwaite suddenly after we had walked some distance in silence by the side of the stream. "I have an idea. Now we are out for a day's angling, and we won't be balked. Instead of trying the water here again, we will go where I know, by experience, that the fishing is excellent. And, what is more, you shall be introduced to a lady whose appearance is sure to interest you, and whose history, I can tell you beforehand, is a very remarkable one." "Indeed?" I said. "May I ask in what way?" "She is connected," answered Mr. Garthwaite, "with an extraordinary story which relates to a family once settled in an old house in this neighbourhood. Her name is Miss Welwyn, but she is less formally known among the poor people about here, who love her dearly, and honour her almost superstitiously, as the Lady of Glenwith Grange. Wait till you have seen her before you ask me to say anything more. She lives in the strictest retirement. I am almost the only visitor who is admitted. Don't say you would rather not go in. Any friend of mine will be welcome at the Grange, the scene of the story, remember, for my sake, the more especially because I have never abused my privilege of introduction. The place is not above 2 miles from here, and the stream, which we call in our country dialect Glenwith Beck, runs through the grounds." As we walked on, Mr. Garthwaite's manner altered. He became unusually silent and thoughtful. The mention of Miss Welwyn's name had evidently called up some recollections which were not in harmony with his everyday mood. feeling that to talk to him on any indifferent subject would be only to interrupt his thoughts to no purpose, I walked by his side in perfect silence, looking out already with some curiosity and impatience for a first view of Glenwith Grange. We stopped, at last, close by an old church, standing on the outskirts of a pretty village. The low wall of the churchyard was bounded on one side by a plantation, and was joined by a park paling, in which I noticed a small wicket gate. Mr. Garthwaite opened it, and led me along a shrubbery path which conducted us circuitously to the dwelling-house. We had evidently entered by a private way, for we approached the building by the back. I looked up at it, curiously, and saw, standing at one of the windows on the lower floor, a little girl watching us as we advanced. She seemed to be about 9 or 10 years old. I could not help stopping a moment to look up at her. Her clear complexion and her long dark hair were so beautiful. And yet there was something in her expression, a dimness and vacancy in her large eyes, a changeless, unmeaning smile on her parted lips, which seemed to jar with all that was naturally attractive in her face, which perplexed, disappointed, and even shocked me, though I hardly knew why. Mr. Garthwaite, who had been walking along thoughtfully, with his eyes on the ground, turned back when he found me lingering behind him, looked up where I was looking, started a little, I thought, and then took my arm, whispered rather impatiently, "Don't say anything about having seen that poor child when you are introduced to Miss Welland. I'll tell you why afterwards," and led me round hastily to the front of the building. It was a very dreary old house, with a lawn in front thickly sprinkled with flower beds, and creepers of all sorts climbing in profusion about the heavy stone porch, and the mullions of the lower windows. In spite of these prettiest of all ornaments clustering brightly round the building, in spite of the perfect repair in which it was kept from top to bottom, there was something repellent to me in the aspect of the whole place. A deathly stillness hung over it, which fell oppressively on my spirits. When my companion rang the loud, deep-toned bell, the sound startled me as if we had been committing a crime in disturbing the silence. And when the door was opened by an old female servant, while the hollow echo of the bell was still vibrating in the air, I could hardly imagine it possible that we should be let in. We were admitted, however, without the slightest demur. I remarked that there was the same atmosphere of dreary repose inside the house which I had already observed, or rather felt, outside it. No dogs barked at our approach. No doors banged in the servants' offices. No heads peeped over the banisters. Not one of the ordinary domestic consequences of an unexpected visit in the country met either eye or ear. The large, shadowy apartment, half library, half breakfast room, into which we were ushered, was as solitary as the hall of entrance. Unless I accept such drowsy evidences as life as were here presented to us in the shape of an Angola cat and grey parrot, the first lying asleep in a chair, the second sitting ancient, solemn and voiceless in a large cage. Mr. Garthwaite walked to the window when we entered, without saying a word. Determining to let his taciturn humour have its way, I asked him no questions, but looked around the room to see what information it would give me, and rooms often do give such information about the character and habits of the owner of the house. 2 tables covered with books were the first objects that attracted me. On approaching them, I was surprised to find that the all-influencing periodical literature of the present day, whose sphere is already almost without limit, whose readers, even in our time, may be numbered by millions, was entirely unrepresented on Miss Welland's table. Nothing modern, nothing contemporary in the world of books presented itself. Of all the volumes beneath my hand, not one bore the badge of the circulating library, or wore the flaring modern livery of gilt cloth. Every work that I took up had been written at least 15 or 20 years since. The prints hanging round the walls, towards which I next looked, were all engraved from devotional subjects by the old masters. The music stand contained no music of later date than the compositions of Haydn and Mozart. Whatever I examined, besides, told me with the same consistency, the same strange tale. The owner of these possessions lived in the bygone time, lived among old recollections and old associations, a voluntary recluse from all that was connected with the passing day. In Miss Welland's house, the stir, the tumult, the idle business of the world evidently appealed in vain to sympathies which grew no longer with the growing hour. As these thoughts were passing through my mind, the door opened, and the lady herself appeared. She looked certainly past the prime of life, longer past it, as I afterwards discovered, than she really was. But I never remember, in any other face, to have seen so much of the better part of the beauty of early womanhood still remaining, as I saw in hers. Sorrow had evidently passed over the fair, calm countenance before me, but had left resignation there as its only trace. Her expression was still youthful in its kindness and its candour especially. It was only when I looked at her hair, that was now growing grey, at her wan, thin hands, at the faint lines marked round her mouth, at the sad serenity of her eyes, that I fairly detected the mark of age, and, more than that, the token of some great grief, which had been conquered, but not banished. Even from her voice alone, from the peculiar uncertainty of its low, calm tones when she spoke, it was easy to conjecture that she must have passed through sufferings, at some time of her life, which had tried to the quick the noble nature that they could not subdue. Mr. Garthwaite and she met each other almost like brother and sister. It was plain that the friendly intimacy between them had been of very long duration. Our visit was a short one. The conversation never advanced beyond the commonplace topics suited to the occasion. It was, therefore, from what I saw, and not from what I heard, that I was enabled to form my judgment of Miss Welland. Deeply as she had interested me, far more deeply than I at all know how to explain in fitting words, I cannot say that I was unwilling to depart when we rose to take leave. Though nothing could be more courteous and more kind than her manner towards me during the whole interview, I could still perceive that it cost her some effort to repress in my presence the shades of sadness and reserve which seemed often ready to steal over her. And I must confess that when I once or twice heard the half-sigh stifled, and saw the momentary relapse into thoughtfulness suddenly restrained, I felt an indefinable awkwardness in my position which made me ill at ease, which set me doubting whether, as a perfect stranger, I had done right in suffering myself to be introduced where no new faces could awaken either interest or curiosity, where no new sympathies could ever be felt, no new friendships ever be formed. As soon as we had taken leave of Miss Welland, and were on our way to the stream in her grounds, I more than satisfied Mr. Garthwaite that the impression the lady had produced on me was of no transitory kind, by overwhelming him with questions about her, not omitting one or two incidental inquiries on the subject of the little girl whom I had seen in the back window. He only rejoined that his story would answer all my questions, and that we would begin to tell it as soon as we had arrived at Glenwith Beck, and were comfortably settled to fishing. 5 more minutes of walking brought us to the bank of the stream, and showed us the water running smoothly and slowly, tinged with the softest green lustre from the reflections of trees, which almost entirely arched it over. Leaving me to admire the view at my ease, Mr. Garthwaite occupied himself with the necessary preparations for the angling, baiting my hook as well as his own. Then, desiring me to sit near him on the bank, he at last satisfied my curiosity by beginning his story. I shall relate it in his own manner, and, as nearly as possible, in his own words. The Lady of Glenwith Grange. I have known Miss Welland long enough to be able to bear personal testimony to the truth of many of the particulars which I am now about to relate. I knew her father, and her younger sister Rosamond, and I was acquainted with the Frenchman who became Rosamond's husband. These are the persons of whom it will be principally necessary for me to speak. They are the only prominent characters in my story. Miss Welland's father died some years since. I remember him very well, though he never excited in me or in anyone else what I ever heard of the slightest feeling of interest. Anyone else that I ever heard of the slightest feeling of interest. When I have said that he inherited a very large fortune, amassed during his father's time, by speculations of a very daring, very fortunate, but not always very honourable kind, that he had bought this old house with the notion of raising his social position by making himself a member of our landed aristocracy in these parts, I have told you as much about him, I suspect, as you would care to hear. He was a thoroughly commonplace man, with no great virtues and no great vices in him. He had a little heart, a feeble mind, an amiable temper, a tall figure, and a handsome face. More than this need not, and cannot, be said on the subject of Mr. Welland's character. I must have seen the late Mrs. Welland very often as a child, but I cannot say that I remember anything more of her than that she was tall and handsome, and very generous and sweet-tempered towards me when I was in her company. She was her husband's superior in birth, as in everything else, was a great reader of books in all languages, and possessed such admirable talents as a musician that her wonderful playing on the organ is remembered and talked of to this day among the old people in our country houses about here. All her friends, as I have heard, were disappointed when she married Mr. Welland, rich as he was, and were afterwards astonished to find her preserving the appearance, at least, of being perfectly happy with a husband who, neither in mind nor heart, was worthy of her. It was generally supposed, and I have no doubt correctly, that she found her great happiness and her great consolation in her little girl, Ida, now the lady from whom we have just parted. The child took after her mother from the first, inheriting her mother's quick sensibilities and, more than all, her mother's quiet firmness, patience, and loving kindness of disposition. From Ida's earliest years, Mrs. Welland undertook the whole superintendence of her education. The two were hardly ever apart, within doors or without. Neighbours and friends said that the little girl was being brought up too fancifully and was not enough among other children, was sadly neglected as to all reasonable and practical teaching, and was perilously encouraged in those dreamy and imaginative tendencies of which she had naturally more than her due share. There was, perhaps, some truth in this, and there might have been still more if Ida had possessed an ordinary character, or had been reserved for an ordinary destiny, but she was a strange child from the first, and a strange future was in store for her. Little Ida reached her 11th year without either brother or sister to be her playfellow and companion at home. Immediately after that period, however, her sister Rosamond was born. Though Mr. Welland's own desire was to have had a son, there were nevertheless great rejoicings yonder in the house on the birth of this second daughter, but they were all turned, only a few months afterwards, to the bitterest grief and despair. The Grange lost its mistress. While Rosamond was still an infant in arms, her mother died. Mrs. Welland had been afflicted with some disorder after the birth of her second child, the name of which I am not learned enough to in medical science, to be able to remember. I only know that she recovered from it, to all appearance, in an unexpectedly short time, that she suffered a fatal relapse, and that she died a lingering and painful death. Mr. Welland, who, in after years, had a habit of vaingloriously describing his marriage as a love match on both sides, was really fond of his wife in his own frivolous, feeble way, and suffered as acutely as such a man could suffer during the latter days of her illness, and at the terrible time when the doctors, one and all, confessed that her life was a thing to be despaired of. He burst into irrepressible passions of tears, and was always obliged to leave the sick-room whenever Mrs. Welland spoke of her approaching end. The last solemn words of the dying woman, the tenderest messages that she could give, the dearest parting wishes that she could express, the most earnest commands that she could leave behind her, the gentlest reasons for consolation that she could suggest to the survivors among those who loved her, were not poured into her husband's ear, but into her child's. From the first period of her illness, Ida had persisted in remaining in the sick-room, rarely speaking, never showing outwardly any signs of terror or grief, except when she was removed from it, and then bursting into hysterical passions of weeping, which no expostulations, no arguments, no commands, nothing, in short, but bringing her back to the bedside, ever availed to calm. Her mother had been her playfellow, her companion, her dearest and most familiar friend, and there seemed something in the remembrance of this which, instead of overwhelming the child with despair, strengthened her to watch faithfully and bravely by her dying parent to the very last. When the parting moment was over, and when Mr. Welland, unable to bear the shock of being present in the house of death at the time of his wife's funeral, left home and went to stay with one of his relations in a distant part of England, Ida, whom it had been his wish to take away with him, petitioned earnestly to be left behind. "I promised Mamma before she died that I would be as good to my little sister Rosamond as she had been to me," said the child simply, "and she told me in return that I might wait here and see her laid in the grave." There happened to be an aunt of Mrs. Welland and an old servant of the family in the house at this time who understood Ida much better than her father did, and they persuaded him not to take her away. I have heard my mother say that the effect of the child's appearance at the funeral on her, and on all who went to see it, was something that she could never think of without the tears coming into her eyes, and could never forget to the last day of her life. It must have been very shortly after this period that I saw Ida for the first time. I remember accompanying my mother on a visit to the old house we have just left in the summer, when I was at home for the holidays. It was a lovely, sunshiny morning. There was nobody indoors, and we walked out into the garden. As we approached that lawn yonder, on the other side of the shrubbery, I saw first a young woman in mourning, apparently a servant, sitting reading, and then a little girl, dressed all in black, moving towards us slowly over the bright turf, and holding up before her a baby whom she was trying to teach to walk. She looked, to my ideas, so very young to be engaged in such an occupation as this, and her gloomy black frock appeared to be such an unnaturally grave garment for a mere child of her age, and looked so doubly dismal by contrast with the brilliant sunny lawn on which she stood, that I quite started when I first saw her, and eagerly asked my mother who she was. The answer informed me of the sad family story, which I have just been relating to you. Mrs. Welland had then been buried about 3 months, and Ida, in her childish way, was trying, as she had promised, to supply her mother's place to her infant sister, Rosamond. I only mention this simple incident because it is necessary, before I proceed to the eventful part of my narrative, that you should know exactly in what relation the sisters stood towards one another from the first. Of all the last parting words that Mrs. Welland had spoken to her child, none had been oftener repeated, none more solemnly urged, than those which had commended the little Rosamond to Ida's love and care. to other persons. The full, the all-trusting dependence which the dying mother was known to have placed in a child hardly 11 years old seemed merely a proof of that helpless desire to cling even to the feeblest consolations which the approach of death so often brings with it. But the event showed that the trust so strangely placed had not been ventured vainly when it was committed to young and tender hands. The whole future existence of the child was one noble proof that she had been worthy of her mother's dying confidence when it was first reposed in her. In that simple incident which I have just mentioned, the new life of the two motherless sisters was all foreshadowed. Time passed. I left school, went to college, travelled in Germany, and stayed there some time to learn the language. At every interval, when I came home and asked about the Wellens, the answer was, in substance, almost always the same. Mr. Welland was giving his regular dinners, performing his regular duties as a county magistrate, enjoying his regular recreations as an amateur farmer and an eager sportsman. His two daughters were never separate. Ida was the same strange, quiet, retiring girl that she had always been, and was still, as the phrase went, spoiling Rosamond in every way in which it was possible for an elder sister to spoil a younger by too much kindness. I myself went to the Grange occasionally when I was in this neighbourhood, in holiday and vacation time, and was able to test the correctness of the picture of life there, which had been drawn for me. I remember the two sisters, when Rosamond was 4 or 5 years old, and when Ida seemed to me even then to be more like the child's mother than her sister. She bore with her the little caprices as sisters do not bear with one another. She was so patient at lesson time, so anxious to conceal any weariness that might overcome her in play hours, so proud when Rosamond's beauty was noticed, so grateful for Rosamond's kisses when the child thought of bestowing them, so quick to notice all that Rosamond did, and to attend to all that Rosamond said, even when visitors were in the room, that she seemed, to my boyish observations, altogether different from other elder sisters in other family circles into which I was then received. I remember them, again, when Rosamond was just growing to womanhood, and was in high spirits at the prospect of spending a season in London and being presented at court. She was very beautiful at that time, much handsomer than Ida. Her accomplishments were talked of far and near in our country circles. Few, if any, of the people, however, who applauded her playing and singing, who admired her watercolour drawings, who were delighted at her fluency when she spoke French, and amazed at her ready comprehension when she read German, knew how little of all this elegant mental cultivation and nimble manual dexterity she owed to her governesses and masters, and how much to her elder sister. It was Ida who really found out the means of stimulating her when she was idle, Ida who helped her through all her worst difficulties, Ida who gently conquered her defects of memory over her books, her inaccuracies of ear at the piano, her errors of taste when she took the brush or pencil in hand. It was Ida alone who worked these marvels, and whose all-sufficient reward for her hardest exertions was a chance word of kindness from her sister's lips. Rosamond was not unaffectionate and not ungrateful, but she inherited much of her father's commonness and frivolity of character. She became so accustomed to owe everything to her sister, to resign all her most trifling difficulties to Ida's ever-ready care, to have all her tastes consulted by Ida's ever-watchful kindness, that she never appreciated, as it deserved, the deep, devoted love of which she was the object. When Ida refused 2 good offers of marriage, Rosamond was as much astonished as the various strangers who wondered why the elder Miss Welland seemed bent on remaining single all her life. When the journey to London, to which I have already alluded, took place, Ida accompanied her father and sister. If she had consulted her own tastes, she would have remained in the country. but Rosamond declared that she should feel quite lost and helpless 20 times a day in town without her sister. It was in the nature of Ida to sacrifice herself to anyone whom she loved, on the smallest occasions as well as the greatest. Her affection was as intuitively ready to sanctify Rosamond's slightest caprices as to excuse Rosamond's most thoughtless faults. So she went to London cheerfully, to witness with pride all the little triumphs won by her sister's beauty, to hear and never tire of hearing all that admiring friends could say in her sister's praise. At the end of the season, Mr. Welwyn and his daughters returned for a short time to the country, then left home again to spend the latter part of the autumn and the beginning of the winter in Paris. They took with them excellent letters of introduction, and saw a great deal of the best society in Paris, foreign as well as English. At one of the first of the evening parties which they attended, the general topic of conversation was the conduct of a certain French nobleman, the Baron Fronval, who had returned to his native country after a long absence, and who was spoken of in terms of high eulogy by the majority of the guests present. The history of who Fronval was, and of what he had done, was readily communicated to Mr. Welwyn and his daughters, and was briefly this. The Baron inherited little from his ancestors besides his high rank and his ancient pedigree. On the death of his parents, he and his 2 unmarried sisters, their only surviving children, found the small territorial property of the Fronvals in Normandy barely productive enough to afford a comfortable subsistence for the 3. The Baron, then a young man of 23, endeavoured to obtain such military or civil employment as might become his rank. But although the Bourbons were at that time restored to the throne of France, his efforts were ineffectual. Either his interest at court was bad, or secret enemies were at work to oppose his advancement. He failed to obtain even the slightest favour, and, irritated by undeserved neglect, resolved to leave France and seek occupation for his energies in foreign countries, where his rank would be no bar to his bettering his fortunes, if he pleased, by engaging in commercial pursuits. An opportunity of the kind that he wanted unexpectedly offered itself. He left his sisters in care of an old male relative of the family at the chateau in Normandy, and sailed, in the first instance, to the West Indies, afterwards extending his wanderings to the continent of South America, and there engaging in mining transactions on a very large scale. After 15 years of absence, during the latter part of which time false reports of his death had reached Normandy, he had just returned to France, having realized a handsome independence, with which he proposed to widen the limits of his ancestral property, and to give his sisters, who were still, like himself, unmarried, all the luxuries and advantages that affluence could bestow. The Baron's independent spirit, and generous devotion to the honour of his family and the happiness of his surviving relatives, were themes of general admiration in most of the social circles in Paris. He was expected to arrive in the capital every day, and it was naturally enough predicted that his reception in society there could not fail to be the most flattering, of the most flattering and most brilliant kind. I think I'm actually going to take a break there. I nearly followed that with, if that's okay with everybody, but, we're not going to take a vote on it. Yeah, that seems like a spot to take a break. I need to get up, move around, stretch a little bit. I mean, you can decide to take a break or not. I'm not going to tell you what to do. Yeah, break time, exactly. Yeah, so let's take a break. I have your permission to take a break. Well, that's very generous of you. Thank you. So kind. Also, hi Andy. Saw you sneaking in. Yeah. Go take a break, drink some water or whatever else, refill your teacups, and I'll see you back here in about 5 minutes or so. Let me find my mouse cursor, based on movement. There we go, I have it. Yeah, I'll see you in 5 minutes. Bye for now. And we're back. Hello. I did, well, I almost did the thing that I usually do of just like somehow sitting here. Why did an M get in there? That's some weird verbal typo. Of sitting here for close to 4 minutes, just kind of zoning out into the middle distance, then looking, seeing, oh good grief, I've been sat here for nearly 4 minutes. I should probably do something like stand up and stretch or something. Yeah, time. I mean, it was break time, and it does feel like it has been. You know, it just sort of has stream break mood. Yeah, 4 minutes just evaporate like that. So that was a slightly weird experience. I I don't know who else is like me. Honestly, hopefully, not very many of you. But where I'm going with this little anecdote is any electric toothbrush havers, put your hands up. In brackets, parentheses, put your hands up. My electric toothbrush has like a timer built into it, as I think most of them do. And it's like every 30 seconds it does like a little sort of vibratory pulse thing to be like, okay, start brushing another part of your mouth. And what I find is saying morning is just a lie. In the late morning / very early afternoon, when I am waking up and doing my teeth, I can kind of gauge how fast the time is going by, like, it doesn't feel like 30 seconds every single time. Sometimes I'll be like, is it gone yet? Did I just completely space out and miss the little like whoop 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 that it does to let me know to like move on? And then it would, and oh, wow, okay, so time's going really slow today. Other times it's just gone, and like that is how I estimate how I gauge, I suppose, my perception of the passage of time for the day. You have that too on some days? Okay, good. Join the club, I suppose. But also sorry for your curse. Yeah, that's, I don't know. It's just a little observation I've started having. I'd say started for a few years now, so I started having like, yeah. I guess we're on a quick time day today. You don't believe in the passage of time? Well, as ever, the fun thing to think about is how the passage of time is affected by speed and the movement of things, and how, you know, well, okay, I'm sure I'm sitting still not doing anything. I'm fairly inert. I'm not moving very fast, except that I'm sat on the surface of a giant ball of rock, which is spinning around very fast, which is orbiting the sun very fast, which is spinning around through the galaxy very fast, which is flying through the universe very fast. And so it's kind of frightening to think on a cosmic level how that affects our perception of time as it happens to us. And before, like, and the thing is, I don't know anything. I have no understanding of the physics behind all this. So when I start talking about this, I feel like I'm very, very quickly going to get into the I'm 13 and this is deep, by the way, levels of like, wow, yeah, isn't that? And then like an actual physicist comes in and goes, well, yes, technically, but also no, here's why you're wrong in understanding it that way. So really what I should do is actually look up some understanding on that. But it's, you know, makes you think. Next time someone asks what you want to drink and it takes you for 30 seconds to remember how to answer, you're going to explain to them it's because we're hurtling through space at high speeds. Yeah, that'll be a good icebreaker. And, you know, hey, let's make a topical statement. Ice needs to be broken quite a lot right now. Ba-boom. Oh no, the channel just got taken down in America. Yeah. Indeed it does. Yeah. But on a lighter topic, hey, who else up hurtling through the universe at unthinkable speeds and perceiving time? Should we carry on with the story? We don't have, yeah, it's not a long story. Oh, that one's got sorry. So I'm reading from, you can't see this, obviously. I'm reading from this is my Folio Society collection of English short stories, which Lucy got for me a few years back. It was really nice. And being Folio Society, it's all illustrated, and I've just like flipped on to an illustration in another story, which is, what's that story? The Case of General Opal and Lady Camper by George Meredith. I don't know it, but the illustration looks like it's got a man holding his shoes by the shoelaces doing some kind of silly walk. And so I'm immediately curious about what that relates to. But yes, it's a very nice book. Although it was bought secondhand for an absolute bargain. So therefore, I am doing my best to keep them intact. But you know, books shouldn't be display pieces, and yet I have this tendency to buy fancy, expensive books and then not use them, and so I feel a little bit less guilty about actually like holding this with my hands and reading the words on the pages. Yeah, the duality of man, right? Like I like owning nice books, but then I have to use them, and like I don't destroy them, but you can see that it's been held and read, and frankly that's how a book should look. That's why you get 2 copies, one for reading and one for looking nice. Ah, yes. That is... Just looking at my shelves. Do I need backup copies of all my... No? Okay, fine. I was waiting for that. I don't need backup copies of all my books? Okay. I have 2 copies of exactly one book, I think. No, at one point I did have 2 copies of This Book is Full of Spiders, because one of them wasn't mine, it just got left here in the divorce. But I do actually legitimately have 2 copies of I don't know how to pronounce it, because it's RX, but as in like the symbol for prescription. So I don't know if I call it RX or prescription. A Tale of Electronegativity by Robert Brockway, who, wow, in the divorce. I mean, yeah. What was I saying? It's yeah, by Robert Brockway, who's a writer for Cracked and now at 1900 Hot Dog. And it was his first like self-published novel. Very silly, very immature, but also pretty good. And I have 2 copies because I bought one for myself, but also at the same time because I was a big fan of his writing on Cracked, and like, well, as I said at the start, I've ordered his latest book, I Will Kill Your Imaginary Friend, for $200. The title of that should give you an indicator for the kind of writing that he does. But yeah, I was a big fan of his articles on Cracked. They were very funny. He was one of my like favorite writers there, and I was like a big supporter of him writing this book and really excited to read it. And he reached out to me. I was like, hey, look, can I send you a signed copy? And I said, I guess I could stop you by simply not giving you my address, but you want to do something kind for me, and I don't know how to respond when someone does that. So, okay, here, have my address. And he sent me a signed copy, very kindly. But I did also say, I'm still going to buy a book. and so I bought it as well for myself. So I have 2 copies of that and a little story to go with it. And so when we were tidying up my stuff, Lucy was like, why do you have 2 copies of this? Can you get rid of one? Like, no, because this is the story, and if I only have 1 copy on the shelf, then it all falls apart. Yeah, I've always appreciated that. I've always been super grateful for him for doing that. So yeah, yeah, it's good. Not all books, of course, but you definitely have some nice copies of things, and then paperbacks for reading and gifting on. Maybe, yeah, like I have my frankly very big, very fancy Algernon Blackwood thing that's got like the Willows and a few others that I've read, and that is entirely a display piece. But fortunately, I have, I think, all those stories available elsewhere in like other publications, so if I want to actually read it or lend it to someone, then I can just do that. But that no one, not even me, gets their hands on that one. Vi and I went to the bookstore today for 1 book and somehow came home with 4. I mean, that is kind of the problem that I had when, say, ordering the latest Brockway book. I went on bookshop.org, which I really like. You can, when you buy from there, you can nominate a bookshop that will get the sale. So I put in, it's not doxing myself to say I live in the region of Bristol, and sort of put in that and looked through some bookshops and found one that looked like a cool place. Because, you know, it's like, here are some bookshops, great. Now I have to choose, and I don't know which one to choose. So I googled the names of one of them and saw they were doing a bunch of fundraising for Palestine. It was like, you seem cool, great, you can have my sale. And then it was like, if you spend a couple more pounds, you get free postage. Well, if you're going to twist my arm, I'm going to buy a 2nd book. So here you go. And so I did that. That's why I bought the Hodgson one as well. Got a fancy set of Sherlock Holmes with pictures and everything, and all the stories and ebook for actual reading. Nice. We do love free postage. Yes, I am a sucker for free postage. So I am, perhaps foolishly, and I think I've said this enough times in the past, of the opinion that I will, and I'm aware this is wrong and incongruous, I will spend like, if you give me the same product on 2 different sites, and one of them is like £30, £5 postage, and the other is £35 free postage, I am helplessly drawn towards the £35 free postage one. It's functionally the same, but for some reason, paying to get the thing here feels just like wasted money, and it's like it doesn't make sense. I know. It's as irrational as my phobia of spiders, and yet I will do it. You got sucked in by buy 3 paperbacks, get 1 for free. Oh, yeah, no, I would pick up 1 and go, well, now I just have to find 3 more. Let's go. Yeah, I am a mark for stuff like that. Yeah. Now, I don't want to go off onto too many topics and sub-tangents and things, but I was reading something the other day, and fortunately for all of you and the runtime of the stream, I can't remember it in enough detail, but it was to do with that kind of, like, the psychology of pricing things. It's to do with, like, having sort of, how like, small, medium, and large sizes, like in doing your food shop, and you have like the small and the medium and the large size, and how those prices are basically graded to upsell you to take the large one. And so it's all kind of to make the large look like a bigger value, even having, like, again, just imagine an item. It could be anything, and like the medium is like £3.50 and the large is £4, and so you go like, oh well, it's only 50p more to get the large, so I'll get that. you hate how manipulatable we are, but it's super interesting. Yeah, completely and exactly. Yeah, like the recent the Peak developers putting out their essentially their information on pricing and how like essentially like the banding on prices and like buyer perception of like $5 is $5, but $6 is also $5, $7 is $5. But like once you start going above $8, that then becomes $10, and so like we as consumers have these like price brackets that we put things into, and so for them wasn't it like $8.99 I think, or was it like $7.99, $8.99 something was like the uppermost limit they found, where as the buyer you still kind of see it and go, oh, that's $5. And so it was kind of the way they could get the most money from players, from buyers, without like players feeling like, oh no, that's gone up into a higher bracket, maybe I'll wait for a Steam sale or something. And yeah, and I think some people took this as like almost kind of aggressive and predatory back in the like, oh, why don't you just make games for the love of it and give them all away for free? Whereas me, I'm like, that's like for the work that goes into this, for the people to do the things that produces this. Yeah, I'll give you $8. I'll give you $7. That's fine. Sort of thing on that as well, about how we don't really understand how rich a billionaire is, because after a certain point we can't feel how much it is. Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it is 1, 2, 3, 4, many much lots. Yeah, like it is, and yeah, like every now and then you see like the post on a social media, just exclusively Blue Sky for me now, but you know, where someone's like breaking down, like not even like the giga billionaires that we have now, but literally $1 billion, like what frivolous things they could do with that every day, literally every single day for the next 10,000 years, and it still wouldn't make a dent in their income. Like they would still earn more off the interest than to like actually impact it. It's like, yeah, or you could just like give it away to your friends. Like you could you could make so many people's lives so much easier. You could do that, but no, we need to put data centers in space. Anyway, before I depress everybody, oh, bad news. No, this is we're gonna have a good time. Don't worry. There's definitely no kind of foreshadowing in all the preamble that we've had so far. Yes, billionaires don't have friends; they have connections. Well, yes, true, exactly. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I have nothing to add. Correct. No, I won't make some kind of topical reference to all the news that's been coming out in the last week about all the billionaire connections. Anyway, the in-space thing really feels like a way to avoid future legal regulations, because it's a terrible idea from... Oh, yeah, no, as someone who's played a bit of Kerbal Space Program, Stephen, I'm sure you can inform us about, if nothing else, just the joys of heat management in space, regardless of all else. But yeah, no, it's anything like, oh, let's build a colony on Mars. Why is that? So I can make the laws. If I put the server in space, data protection doesn't apply, right? Yeah, that's that. Yeah, you get to make the rules yourself. Where was I? There's not going to be any like link in the text to this part because we just stopped in the middle of the book. So anyway, I'm going to carry on. This is actually going to come to a full stream length because we're just sitting chatting. I hope that's okay with everyone. Let's carry on with the Lady of Glenwith Grange. The Wellens listened to this story with some little interest. Rosamond, who was very romantic, being especially attracted by it, and openly avowing to her father and sister when they got back to their hotel that she felt as ardent a curiosity as anybody to see the adventurous and generous Baron. The desire was soon gratified. Bronval came to Paris as had been anticipated, was introduced to the Wellens, met them constantly in society, made no favourable impression on Ida, but won the good opinion of Rosamond from the first, and was regarded with such high approval by their father that when he mentioned his intention of visiting England in the spring of the new year, he was cordially invited to spend the hunting season at Glenwith Grange. I came back from Germany about the same time that the Wellens returned from Paris, and at once set myself to improve my neighbourly intimacy with the family. I was very fond of Ida, more fond perhaps than my vanity will now allow me to, but that is of no consequence. It is much more to the purpose to tell you that I heard the whole of the Baron's story enthusiastically related by Mr. Welland and Rosamond, that he came to the Grange at the appointed time, that I was introduced to him, and that he produced as unfavourable an impression upon me as he had already produced upon Ida. It was whimsical enough, but I really could not tell why I disliked him, though I could account very easily, according to my own notions, for his winning the favour and approval of Rosamond and her father. He was certainly a handsome man, as far as features went. He had a winning gentleness and graceful respect in his manner when he spoke to women, and he sang remarkably well, with one of the sweetest tenor voices I ever heard. These qualities alone were quite sufficient to attract any girl of Rosamond's disposition, and I certainly never wondered why he was a favourite of hers. Then, as to her father, the Baron was not only fitted to win his sympathy and regard in the field, by proving himself an ardent sportsman and an excellent rider, but was also, in virtue of some of his minor personal peculiarities, just the man to gain the friendship of his host. Mr. Welland was as ridiculously prejudiced as most weak-headed Englishmen are on the subject of foreigners in general. In spite of his visit to Paris, the vulgar notion of a Frenchman continued to be his notion, both while he was in France and when he returned from it. Now, the Baron was unlike the traditional Mounseer of English songs, plays, and satires as a man could well be, and it was on account of his very dissimilarity that Mr. Welland first took a violent fancy to him, and then invited him to his house. Bronval spoke English remarkably well, wore neither beard, moustaches, or whiskers, kept his hair cut almost unbecomingly short, dressed in the extreme of plainness and modest good taste, talked little in general society, uttered his words, when he did speak, with singular calmness and deliberation, and, to crown all, had the greater part of his acquired property invested in English securities. In Mr. Welland's estimation, such a man as this was a perfect miracle of a Frenchman, and he admired and encouraged him accordingly. I have said that I disliked him, yet could not assign a reason for my dislike, and I can only repeat it now. He was remarkably polite to me. We often rode together in hunting, and sat near each other at the Grange table, but I could never become familiar with him. He always gave me the idea of a man who had some mental reservation in saying the most trifling thing. There was a constant restraint, hardly perceptible to most people, but plainly visible nevertheless to me, which seemed to accompany his lightest words, and to hang about his most familiar manner. This, however, was no just reason for my secretly disliking and distrusting him as I did. Ida said as much to me, I remember, when I confessed to her what my feelings towards him were, and tried, but vainly, to induce her to be equally candid with me in return. She seemed to shrink from the tacit condemnation of Rosamond's opinion, which such a confidence on her part would have implied. And yet she watched the growth of that opinion, or, in other words, the growth of her sister's liking for the Baron, with an apprehension and sorrow which she tried fruitlessly to conceal. Even her father began to notice that her spirits were not so good as usual, and to suspect the cause of her melancholy. I remember he jested, with all the dense insensibility of a stupid man, about Ida having invariably been jealous from a child if Rosamond looked kindly upon anybody except her elder sister. The spring began to get far advanced towards summer. Fronval paid a visit to London, came back in the middle of the season to Glenwith Grange, wrote to put off his departure for France, and, at last, not at all to the surprise of anybody who was intimate with the Wellens, proposed to Rosamond and was accepted. He was candour and generosity itself when the preliminaries of the marriage settlement were under discussion. He quite overpowered Mr. Welland and the lawyers with references, papers, and statements of the distribution and extent of his property, which were found to be perfectly correct. His sisters were written to, and returned the most cordial answers, saying that the state of their health would not allow them to come to England for the marriage, but adding a warm invitation to Normandy for the bride and her family. Nothing, in short, could be more straightforward and satisfactory than the Baron's behaviour, and the testimonies to his worth and integrity which the news of the approaching marriage produced from his relatives and his friends. The only joyless face at the Grange now was Ida's. At any time it would have been a hard trial to her to resign that first and foremost place, which she had held since childhood in her sister's heart, as she knew she must resign it when Rosamond married. But, secretly disliking and distrusting Fronval as she did, the thought that he was soon to become the husband of her beloved sister filled her with a vague sense of terror, which she could not explain to herself, which it was imperatively necessary that she should conceal, and which, on those very accounts, became a daily and hourly torment to her that was almost more than she could bear. One consolation alone supported her. Rosamond and she were not to be separated. She knew that the Baron secretly disliked her as much as she disliked him. She knew that she must bid farewell to the brighter and happier part of her life on the day when she went to live under the same roof with her sister's husband. But, true to the promise made years and years ago by her dying mother's bed, true to the affection which was the ruling and beautiful feeling of her whole existence, she never hesitated about indulging Rosamond's wish, when the girl, in her bright, light-hearted way, said that she could never get on comfortably in the married state unless she had Ida to live with her and help her just the same as ever. The Baron was too polite a man even to look dissatisfied when he heard of the proposed arrangement, and it was therefore settled from the beginning that Ida was always to live with her sister. The marriage took place in the summer, and the bride and bridegroom went to spend their honeymoon in Cumberland. On their return to Glenwith Grange, a visit to the Baron's sisters in Normandy was talked of, but the execution of this project was suddenly and disastrously suspended by the death of Mr. Welland from an attack of pleurisy. In consequence of this calamity, the projected journey was, of course, deferred. And when autumn and the shooting season came, the Baron was unwilling to leave the well-stocked preserves of the Grange. He seemed, indeed, to grow less and less inclined, as time advanced, for the trip to Normandy, and wrote excuse after excuse to his sisters when letters arrived from them urging him to pay the promised visit. In the winter-time, he said he would not allow his wife to risk a long journey. In the spring, his health was pronounced to be delicate. In the genial summer-time, the accomplishment of the proposed visit would be impossible, for at that period the Baroness expected to become a mother. Such were the apologies which Fronval seems almost glad to be able to send to his sisters in France. The The marriage was, in the strictest sense of the term, a happy one. The Baron, though he never altogether lost the strange restraint and reserve of his manner, was, in his quiet, peculiar way, the fondest and kindest of husbands. He went to town occasionally on business, but always seemed glad to return to the Baroness. He never varied in the politeness of his bearing towards his wife's sister. He behaved with the most courteous hospitality towards all the friends of the Wellens. In short, he thoroughly justified the good opinion which Rosamond and her father had formed of him when they first met at Paris. And yet no experience of his character thoroughly reassured Ida. Months passed on quietly and pleasantly, and still the secret sadness, that indefinable, unreasonable apprehension on Rosamond's account, hung heavily on her sister's heart. At the beginning of the first summer months, a little domestic inconvenience happened, which showed the Baroness, for the first time, that her husband's temper could be seriously ruffled, and that by the veriest trifle. He was in the habit of taking in 2 French provincial newspapers, one published at Bordeaux and the other at Havre. He always opened these journals the moment they came, looks at one particular column of each with the deepest attention for a few minutes, then carelessly threw them aside into the waste-paper basket. I'm just cleaning some cat hair off the microphone so I don't inhale it, and it's distracting me from the important task of reading. His wife and her sister were at first rather surprised at the manner in which he read his 2 papers, but they thought no more of it when he explained that he only took them in to consult them about French commercial intelligence, which might be occasionally of importance to him. These papers were published weekly. On the occasion to which I have just referred, the Bordeaux paper came on the proper day, as usual, but the Havre paper never made its appearance. This trifling circumstance seemed to make the Baron seriously uneasy. He wrote off directly to the country post office and to the newspaper agent in London. His wife, astonished to see his tranquillity so completely overthrown by so slight a cause, tried to restore his good humour by jesting with him about the missing newspaper. He replied by the first angry and unfeeling words that she had heard issue from his lips. She was then within about 6 weeks of her confinement, and very unfit to bear harsh answers from anybody, least of all from her husband. On the 2nd day, no answer came. On the afternoon of the 3rd, the Baron rode off to the post-town to make inquiries. About an hour after he had gone, a strange gentleman came to the Grange and asked to see the Baroness. On being informed that she was not well enough to receive visitors, he sent up a message that his business was of great importance, and that he would wait downstairs for a second answer. On receiving this message, Rosamond turned, as usual, to her elder sister for advice. Ida went downstairs immediately to see the stranger. What I am now about to tell you of the extraordinary interview which took place between them, and of the shocking events that followed it, I have heard from Miss Welland's own lips. She felt unaccountably nervous when she entered the room. The stranger bowed very politely, and asked, in a foreign accent, if she were the Baroness Franval. She set him right on this point, and told him she attended to all matters of business for the Baroness, adding that, if his errand at all concerned her sister's husband, the Baron was not then at home. The stranger answered that he was aware of it when he called, and that the unpleasant business on which he came could not be confided to the Baron, at least in the first instance. She asked why. He said he was there to explain, and expressed himself as feeling greatly relieved at having to open his business to her, because she would doubtless be best able to prepare her sister for the bad news that he was, unfortunately, obliged to bring. The sudden faintness which overcame her as he spoke these words prevented her from addressing him in return, He poured out some water for her from a bottle which happened to be standing on the table, and asked if he might depend on her fortitude. She tried to say yes, but the violent throbbing of her heart seemed to choke her. He took a foreign newspaper from his pocket, saying that he was a secret agent of the French police, and that the paper was the Havre Journal for the past week, and that it had been expressly kept from reaching the Baron, as usual, through the agent's interference. He then opened the newspaper and begged that she would nerve herself sufficiently, for her sister's sake, to read certain lines which would give her some hint of the business that brought him there. He pointed to the passage as he spoke. It was among the shipping entries, and was thus expressed: "Arrived, the Berenice, from San Francisco, with a valuable cargo of hides. She brings one passenger, the Baron Fronval of Chateau Fronval in Normandy." As Miss Welwyn read the entry, her heart, which had been throbbing violently but the moment before, seemed suddenly to cease from all action, and she began to shiver, though it was a warm June evening. The agent held the tumbler to her lips and made her drink a little of the water, entreating her very earnestly to take courage and listen to him. He then sat down and referred again to the entry, every word he uttered seeming to burn itself in for ever, as she expressed it, on her memory and her heart. He said, "It has been ascertained beyond the possibility of doubt that there is no mistake about the name in the lines you have just read, and it is as certain as that we are here that there is only one Baron Fronval now alive. The question, therefore, is whether the passenger of the Berenice is the true Baron, or, I beg you most earnestly to bear with me and to compose yourself, or the husband of your sister. The person who arrived last week at Havre was scouted as an impostor by the ladies of the chateau, the moment he presented himself there as their brother, returning to them after 16 years of absence. The authorities were communicated with, and I and my assistants were instantly sent for from Paris. We wasted no time in questioning the supposed impostor. He either was, or affected to be, in a perfect frenzy of grief and indignation. We just ascertained, from competent witnesses, that he bore an extraordinary resemblance to the real Baron, and that he was perfectly familiar with places and persons in and about the chateau. We just ascertained that, and then proceeded to confer with the local authorities and to examine their private entries of suspected persons in their jurisdiction, ranging back over a past period of 20 years or more. One of the entries thus consulted contained these particulars: Hector Auguste Montbrun, son of a respectable proprietor in Normandy, well-educated, gentlemanlike manners, on bad terms with his family. Character, bold, cunning, unscrupulous, self-possessed, is a clever mimic, may be easily recognized by a striking likeness to the Baron Fronval, imprisoned for 20 for theft and assault. Miss Welwyn saw the agent look up at her after he had read this extract from the police book, to ascertain if she was still able to listen to him. He asked, with some appearance of alarm as their eyes met, if she would like some more water. She was just able to make a sign in the negative. He took a second extract from his pocket-book and went on. He said, "The next entry, under the same name, was dated 4 years later, and ran thus: H. A. Montbrun, condemned to the galleys for life, for assassination and other crimes not officially necessary to be here specified. Escaped from custody at Toulon. Is known, since the expiration of his first term of imprisonment, to have allowed his beard to grow, and to have worn his hair long, with the intention of rendering it impossible for those acquainted with him in his native province to recognize him, as heretofore, by the likeness of the Baron Fronval." There were more particulars added, not important enough for extract. We immediately examine... that's still him talking. My bad. I'll stay in the accent. There were more particulars added, not important enough for extract. We immediately examined the supposed impostor, for if he was Montbrun, we knew that
we should find on his shoulder the 2 letters of the convict brand TF, standing for Travaux Forcés. After the minutest examination with the mechanical and chemical tests used on such occasions, not the slightest trace of the brand was to be found. The moment this astounding discovery was made, I started to lay an embargo on the forthcoming numbers of the Havre Journal for that week, which were about to be sent to the English agent in London. I arrived at Havre on Saturday, the morning of publication, in time to execute my design. I waited there long enough to communicate by telegraph with the superiors in Paris, then hastened to this place, where my errand here is, He might have gone on speaking for some moments longer, but Miss Welwyn heard no more. Her first sensation, on returning consciousness, was the feeling that water was being sprinkled on her face. Then she saw that all the windows in the room had been set wide open to give her air, and that she and the agent were still alone. At first she felt bewildered and hardly knew who he was, but he soon recalled to her mind the horrible realities that had brought him there, by apologizing for not having summoned assistance when she fainted. He said it was of the last importance, in Franval's absence, that no one in the house should imagine anything unusual was taking place in it. Then, after giving her an interval of a minute or two to collect what little strength she had left, he added that he would not increase her sufferings by saying anything more, just then, on the shocking subject of the investigation which it was his duty to make, that he would leave her to recover herself, and to consider what was the best course to be taken with the Baroness in the present terrible emergency, and that he would privately return to the house between 8 and 9 o'clock that evening, ready to act as Miss Welwyn wished, and to afford her and her sister any aid and protection of which they might stand in need. With these words he bowed, and noiselessly quitted the room. For the first few awful minutes after she was left alone, Miss Welwyn sat helpless and speechless, utterly numbed in heart and mind and body. Then a sort of instinct, she was incapable of thinking, seemed to urge her to conceal the fearful news from her sister as long as possible. She ran upstairs to Rosamond's sitting-room and called through the door, for she dared not trust herself in her sister's presence, that the visitor had come on some troublesome business from their late father's lawyers, and that she was going to shut herself up and write some long letters in connection with that business. After she had got into her own room, she was never sensible of how time was passing, never conscious of any feeling within her except a baseless, helpless hope that the French police might yet be proved to have made some terrible mistake, until she heard a violent shower of rain come on from a little after sunset. The noise of the rain, and the freshness it brought with it in the air, seemed to awaken her as if from a painful and fearful sleep. The power of reflection returned to her. Her heart heaved and bounded with an overwhelming terror as the thought of Rosamond came back vividly to it. Her memory recurred despairingly to the long-past day of her mother's death, and to the farewell promise she had made by her mother's bedside. She burst into an hysterical passion of weeping that seemed to be tearing her to pieces. In the midst of it, she heard the clatter of a horse's hoofs in the courtyard, and knew that Rosamond's husband had come back. Dipping her handkerchief in cold water and passing it over her eyes as she left the room, she instantly hastened to her sister. Fortunately, the daylight was fading in the old-fashioned chamber that Rosamond occupied. Before they could say 2 words to each other, Franval was in the room. He seemed violently irritated, said that he had waited for the arrival of the mail, that the missing newspaper had not come by it, that he had got wet through, that he had felt a shivering fit coming on, and that he believed he had caught a violent cold. His wife anxiously suggested some simple remedies. He roughly interrupted her, saying that there was but one remedy, the remedy of going to bed, and so he left them without another word. She just put her handkerchief to her eyes and said softly to her sister, "How he is changed," then spoke no more. They sat silent for half an hour or longer. After that, Rosamond went affectionately and forgivingly to see how her husband was. She returned, saying that he was in bed and in a deep, heavy sleep, and predicting hopefully that he would wake up quite well the next morning. In the next few minutes more the clock struck 9, and Ida heard the servant's step ascending the stairs. She suspected what his errand was, and went out to meet him. Her presentiment had not deceived her. The police agent had arrived, and was waiting for her downstairs. He asked her if she had said anything to her sister, or had thought of any plan of action, the moment he entered the room, and, on receiving a reply in the negative, inquired further if the Baron had come home yet. She answered that he had, that he was ill and tired and vexed, and that he had gone to bed. The agent asked in an eager whisper if she knew that he was asleep and alone in bed, and, when he received her reply, said that he must go up to the bedroom directly. She began to feel the faintness coming over her again, and with it sensations of loathing and terror that she could neither express to others nor define to herself. He said that if she hesitated to let him avail himself of this unexpected opportunity, her scruples might lead to fatal results. He reminded her that if the Baron were really the convict Monbrun, the claims of society and of justice demanded that he should be discovered by the first available means, and that if he were not, if some inconceivable mistake had really been committed, then such a plan for getting immediately at the truth was now proposed, would ensure the delivery of an innocent man from suspicion, and at the same time spare him the knowledge that he had ever been suspected. This last argument had its effect on Miss Welland. The baseless, helpless hope that the French authorities might yet be proved to be in error, which she had already felt in her own room, returned to her now. She suffered the agent to lead her upstairs. He took the candle from her hand when she pointed to the door, opened it softly, and, leaving it ajar, went into the room. She looked through the gap, with a feverish, horror-struck curiosity. Ronval was lying on his side in a profound sleep, with his back turned towards the door. The agent softly placed the candle upon a small reading table between the door and the bedside, softly drew down the bedclothes a little way from the sleeper's back, then took a pair of scissors from the toilet table, and very gently and slowly began to cut away, first the loose folds, then the intervening strips of linen from the part of Franval's nightgown that was over his shoulders. When the upper part of his back had been bared in this way, the agent took the candle and held it near the flesh. Miss Welland heard him exclaim some word under his breath, then saw him looking round to where she was standing and beckoning her to come in. Mechanically, she obeyed. Mechanically, she looked down where his finger was pointing. It was the convict Monbrun. There, just visible under the bright light of the candle, were the fatal letters T.F. branded on the villain's shoulder. Though she could neither move nor speak, the horror of this discovery did not deprive her of her consciousness. She saw the agent softly draw up the bedclothes again into the proper position, replace the scissors on the toilet table, and take from it a bottle of smelling salts. She felt him removing her from the bedroom and helping her quickly downstairs, giving her the salts to smell by the way. When they were alone again, he said, with the first appearance of agitation that he had yet exhibited, "Now, madame, for God's sake, collect all your courage and be guided by me. You and your sister had better leave the house immediately. Have you any relatives in the neighborhood with whom you could take refuge?" They had none. "What is the name of the nearest town where you could get good accommodation for the night?" "Harleybrook." He wrote the name down on his tablet. How far off is it? 12 miles. You had better have the carriage out at once, to go there with as little delay as possible, leaving me to pass the night here. I will communicate with you tomorrow at the principal hotel. Can you compose yourself sufficiently to be able to tell the head servant, if I ring for him, that he is to obey my orders till further notice?" The servant was summoned and received his instructions, the agent going out with him to see that the carriage was got ready quietly and quickly. Miss Welland went upstairs to her sister. How the fearful news was first broken to Rosamond, I cannot relate to you. Miss Welland has never confided to me, has never confided to anybody, what happened at the interview between her sister and herself that night. I can tell you nothing of the shock they both suffered, except that the younger and the weaker died under it, that the elder and the stronger has never recovered from it, and never will. They went away the same night with one attendant to Harleybrook, as the agent had advised. Before daybreak, Rosamond was seized with the pains of premature labour. She died 3 days after, unconscious of the horror of her situation, wandering in her mind about past times and singing old tunes that Ida had taught her as she lay in her sister's arms. The child was born alive and lives still. You saw her at the window as we came in at the back way to the Grange. I surprised you, I dare say, by asking you not to speak of her to Miss Welland. Perhaps you noticed something vacant in the little girl's expression. I am sorry to say that her mind is more vacant still. If idiot does not sound like a mocking word, however tenderly and pityingly one may wish to utter it, I should tell you that the poor thing had been an idiot from her birth. You will, doubtless, want to hear now what happened at Glenwith Grange after Miss Welland and her sister had left it. I have seen the letter which the police agent sent the next morning to Harleybrook, and speaking from my recollection of that, I shall be able to relate all you can desire to know. First, as to the history of the scoundrel Monbrun, I need only tell you that he was identical with an escaped convict, who for a long term of years had successfully eluded the vigilance of the authorities all over Europe and in America as well. In conjunction with 2 accomplices, he had succeeded in possessing himself of large sums of money by the most criminal means. He also acted secretly as the banker of his convict brethren, whose dishonest gains were all confided to his hands for safekeeping. He would have been certainly captured on venturing back to France, along with his 2 associates, but for the daring imposture in which he took refuge, and which, if the true Baron Fronval had really died abroad, as was reported, would, in all probability, never have been found out. 1 second. We are now being interrupted. Going that way. Not the way you get up onto... It's not the way you get up onto my lap. No, it's not. Not like that. You don't go there. You, who are so bound by routine, now changing things. You jumping up? It literally got like 1 page left, dude. Hi. Joey says hi. Hi. There you go. Got another? Any more? No. Any more words? I should get you a little microphone so that you can join in on the podcast. Podcasts. There must be multiple podcasts already available. Where was I? Oh yes. Besides his extraordinary likeness to the Baron, he had every other requisite for carrying on his deception successfully. Though his parents were not wealthy, he had received a good education. He was so notorious for his gentlemanlike manners among the villainous associates of his crimes and excesses that they nicknamed him the Prince. all his early life had been passed in the neighbourhood of the Château Franval. He knew what were the circumstances which had induced the Baron to leave it. He had been in the country to which the Baron had emigrated. He was able to refer familiarly to persons and localities, at home and abroad, with which the Baron was sure to be acquainted. And, lastly, he had an expatriation of 15 years to plead for him as his all-sufficient excuse if he made any slight mistakes before the Baron's sisters, in his assumed character of their long absent brother. It will be, of course, hardly necessary for me to tell you, in relation to this part of the subject, that the true Franval was immediately and honourably reinstated in the family rights of which the impostor had succeeded for a time in depriving him. According to Montbrun's own account, he had married poor Rosamond purely for love, and the probabilities certainly are that the pretty, innocent English girl had really struck the villain's fancy for the time, and that the easy, quiet life he was leading at the Grange pleased him, by contrast with his perilous and vagabond existence of former days. What might have happened if he had time enough to grow wearied of his ill-fated wife and his English home, it is now useless to inquire. What really did happen on the morning when he awoke after the flight of Ida and her sister can be briefly told. As soon as his eyes opened, they rested on the police agent, sitting quietly by the bedside with a loaded pistol in his hand. Montbrun knew immediately that he was discovered, but he never for an instant lost the self-possession for which he was famous. He said he wished to have 5 minutes allowed him to deliberate quietly in bed, whether he should resist the French authorities on English ground, and so gain time by obliging the one government to apply specially to have him delivered up by the other, or whether he should accept the terms officially offered to him by the agent, if he quietly allowed himself to be captured. He chose the latter course. It was suspected because he wished to communicate personally with some of his convict associates in France, whose fraudulent gains were in his keeping, and because he felt boastfully confident of being able to escape again whenever he pleased. Be his secret motives, however, what they might, he allowed the agent to conduct him peaceably from the Grange, first writing a farewell letter to poor Rosamond, full of heartless French sentiment and glib sophistries about fate and society. His own fate was not long in overtaking him. He attempted to escape again, as it had been expected he would, and was shot by the sentinel on duty at the time. I remember hearing that the bullet entered his head and killed him on the spot. My story is done. It is 10 years now since Rosamond was buried in the churchyard yonder, and it is 10 years also since Miss Welwyn returned to be the lonely inhabitant of Glenwith Grange. She now lives but in the remembrances that it calls up before her of her happier existence of former days. There is hardly an object in the old house which does not tenderly and solemnly remind her of the mother whose last wishes she lived to obey, of the sister whose happiness was once her dearest earthly care. Those prints you noticed on the library walls, Rosamond used to copy in the pastime, when her pencil was often guided by Ida's hand. Those music books that you were looking over, she and her mother have played from together, through many a long and quiet summer's evening. She has no ties now to bind her to the present, but the poor child whose affliction it is her constant effort to lighten, and the little peasant population around her, whose humble cares and wants and sorrows she is always ready to relieve. Far and near her modest charities have penetrated among us, and far and near she is heartily beloved and blessed in many a labourer's household. There is no poor man's hearth, not in this village only, but for miles away from it as well, at which you would not be received with the welcome given to an old friend, if you only told the cottagers that you knew the lady of Glenwith Grange. The end.
with my sincere apologies to France. Thank you for listening. Yeah, I glanced up and saw heartless French sentiment. I was like, yeah, I mean, because the thing is, we can just discuss this immediately. Why not? Because like earlier, when talking about the dad, you got to run. Thanks for stories, no worries. Thank you for being here. Have a good run. When talking about Ida's and Rosamund's father, and how he himself had a bunch of like prejudices towards the French, and then found this Baron Fronval who had none of them. It's like, okay, so it's like we're saying it's a bad thing to hold these prejudices against the French, and then we end on that heartless French sentiment. I'm like, pot kettle, like you. You also, okay, fine, sorry, yeah. Also, the apologies for I did my best with the accent. Although I immediately forgot French for F. Fur, is it? T is T. Is it TF? Is it T fur? I'm not sure. TF. Well, either way. Yeah, I had an attempt. There was one of those. Yeah, the other thought that I left with on reading this is this lady of Glenwith Grange happy with all of this story? F is just F, if you remember correctly. Oh, right. What? Oh, okay. Maybe I got it. I don't know. If anyone else, you know what? Whatever. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, is she actually okay with this entire story being... This is like taking... Presumably this is all fiction, and like taking the framing of this as in I, the author, went on a fishing trip with my friend, who then went, oh, actually, I'm going to introduce you to someone, and then he did, and then when we left that, he told me her entire, frankly, quite painful and tragic life story, and now I, the author, have written this into my own short story that I've put here before you. I'm like, did you get her permission for this? Because maybe... maybe if she doesn't go out of her way to tell this to everyone, maybe you shouldn't either. I don't know. So it's just a work of fiction, mate. I know. I've addressed this voice in my head that's calling me out on it. Also, like the ages of characters seems very interesting, because it says like Rosamund was buried. Like when this takes place, when their little fishing trip takes place, it says Rosamund was buried 10 years past, and she died like what, a few months within, like, I guess 9 to 12 months of being married, and probably wouldn't have been like beyond her 20s when getting married. You know, it's not exactly clear, but she, you know, what I'm trying to get at is he's talking about this woman who is like greying and elderly and practically decrepit, and I'm like, is she 40? Is she somewhere between 35 and 40? Because her younger sister, who she was like, what, 11 years older or something, she's... How old are these people meant to be that you're describing in this fashion? I don't know. But yeah, it's good. It's sad, it's tragic. But I think it's one. Another one I think is I find it well written, in that I find it sort of enjoyable to read. Like, it just, they're not the sort of clunky, confusing sentences that trip my brain up. It felt to me like it just sort of flowed quite nicely. So even if I sort of, you know, some of the content I have questions with, but yeah, I guess that brings us to the end of the stream. and I managed to stretch it out into a full runtime. So, you know, collectively, we did that by chatting about all sorts of other things. Again, apologies if you just want the story on the VOD. I will do my best to have time-stamped it for you, if you're just learning about that now, sorry, it was in the description below the video on YouTube, where you can now go and click and look and go, oh, I didn't realise. But yeah, I'm going to take off. So, and it's late. I'm tired. Joey's sneezing. No worries, Quirk. Thank you for being here. So I'm not going to raid anywhere. I'm just going to park things and send you all off into the wild. Yeah, thank you everybody, and as always, sincerely, thank you for being here. It is nice to know that there are people who enjoy this and appreciate this. I'm happy to be a second screen, you know, sit and do whatever you like, or even just like minimize in the background but still with the sound going. I'll take it. That's okay. Yeah, go take care. Have a good and enjoyable rest of the weekends. Have the weekend that you need. And I don't know the plans for next week, but they will go up on the Discord, and if you get notifications, you'll see notifications when their stream's happening. But for now, thank you, take care, be well, look after yourselves and the people around you, and we will see you next time. Goodbye.